The wind screamed across the Wyoming high country like a living thing bent on murder. White fury tore through the canyon walls, turning the world into nothing but white chaos erasing the horizon, the road, the very concept of direction itself. Inside the mail coach, Eliza Catherine Brennan pressed her gloved hands against the frosted window and watched her future disappear into the storm. She had traveled 2,000 miles for this. Left Boston with 43 cents in her pocket, a letter from a stranger, and the kind of desperate hope that comes only when every other door has slammed shut. The coach lurched violently to the left, throwing her against the wooden bench. Her carpetbag slid across the floor, spilling its meager contents. A photograph of her mother dead these 5 years. A worn leather case containing surgical scissors, bandages, and a few glass vials of medicine. The letter creased from 100 readings, its ink faded, but its promise still legible. Seeking practical woman for Wyoming Territory Ranch. No romance required. Medical knowledge valued. Room and board provided. Inquire Samuel Wade, care of Fort Laramie Postal Station. The driver's voice cut through the howling wind, sharp with panic. Can't see the road. Can't see nothing. Eliza pulled her wool cloak tighter and leaned forward. Through the small opening to the driver's bench, she could see his hunched shoulders, the desperate way he whipped the reins against horses that were already running blind with terror. The coach hit something, a rock or a frozen rut, and the entire vehicle tilted sickeningly to one side before crashing back down. "Stop the coach," she shouted. "We need to wait it out." But the driver either didn't hear her or didn't care. The horses plunged forward into the white fury, their hooves drumming a frantic rhythm against packed snow and frozen earth. Eliza braced herself against the wall, her heart hammering in her chest. She had survived the war years in Boston, nursing soldiers with shattered bodies and shattered minds. She had survived her father's drinking his rage, the slow disintegration of everything she had known. She had survived the closure of St. Mary's Hospital, the auction of their small house on Beacon Hill, the final humiliation of standing in the employment line with 300 other women, all of them chasing the same 6 positions. She refused to die here, 3 miles from a town whose name she barely knew, on her way to marry a man whose face she had never seen. The coach lurched again, harder this time. Something cracked, the sound sharp and final, even through the storm. The vehicle tilted further, and then the world turned sideways. Eliza felt herself lifted, suspended, for one impossible moment, and then she was falling, tumbling, her body slamming against wood and metal and leather. The crash seemed to last forever, and no time at all. When the movement finally stopped, she found herself lying on what had been the coach's side wall, now the floor staring up at the door above her head. Blood trickled warm down her temple. She touched it with shaking fingers, saw the red against her pale skin. Not deep. She had seen worse. She had stitched worse on boys half her age, their insides trying to become their outsides, their screams echoing in hospital corridors that smelled of carbolic and death. Miss, you alive in there?" The driver's face appeared at the window, snow clinging to his beard, his eyes wide with fear that had nothing to do with her welfare. "I'm alive," she managed. "Help me out." He wrenched the door open and she hauled herself up through the opening, her muscles screaming protest. The cold hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't just cold. It was the kind of cold that stole your breath, that burned your lungs, that turned your fingers to useless clubs of frozen meat within minutes. The wind drove snow into her face with enough force to sting, and she could barely see the driver standing 3 feet away. "Where are we?" she shouted over the wind. 3 miles south of town, maybe 4. He was already unhitching the horses, his movements jerky with panic. "I got to get these animals to shelter, or they'll freeze." "What about me?" He didn't look at her. "Town's north. Follow the road. You got maybe an hour before you freeze solid." "An hour?" The word came out as a gasp. "You can't leave me here. Lady, I got 6 horses worth more than both our lives. You want to live, you run." He swung up onto the lead horse's bare back, gathered the reins of the others. "God help you, miss, but I can't." And then he was gone, swallowed by the white wall, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the wind's endless howl. Eliza stood alone beside the overturned coach, her carpetbag in one hand, her medical case in the other, and absolutely no idea which direction was north. The cold was already working its way through her traveling dress, through the layers of petticoats and cotton that had seemed so sensible in Boston but were laughably inadequate here. She could feel it in her toes first, a pins and needles sensation that she knew would turn to numbness, then to the dangerous nothing that preceded frostbite. She had seen it during the war. Winters had amputated blackened toes and fingers from soldiers who had stood watch in the cold too long. She knew exactly what would happen if she stayed here. Think, Eliza. Think like you're diagnosing a patient. Assess the situation. Identify the threat. Formulate a plan. The threat was obvious. Exposure. Hypothermia. She had perhaps 60 minutes before her core temperature dropped below sustainable levels. Less if she stayed still. Movement generated heat, but movement without direction would only exhaust her faster, make her sweat, and sweat was death in cold like this. North. The driver had said north. But which way was north when the world was nothing but horizontal snow? She turned slowly, trying to orient herself. The coach had been traveling uphill before the crash, she remembered that, which meant downhill was south back the way they had come. Uphill, then. She would walk uphill and pray that the road led to town before her body gave out. Eliza started walking. The first 10 minutes were almost bearable. Her legs still worked. Her hands still functioned well enough to grip her bags. The road was visible as a slight depression in the snow, a path worn by wagons and horses over years of use. She followed it head down against the wind, each step a small victory, but the cold was relentless. It crept past her defenses, found every gap in her clothing, every exposed inch of skin. Her face went numb first, then her ears, despite her bonnet. Her fingers began to lose their grip on the bags. She switched hands, tucked one set of fingers under her arm to warm them, but it was like trying to heat ice with ice. 20 minutes. The road curved to the left, climbed steeper. Her breath came in ragged gasps that turned to ice crystals in the air before her face. She could no longer feel her feet. Each step was an act of faith that her legs would support her, that the ground would be there when her boot came down. 30 minutes. She fell for the first time, her numb feet failing to navigate a drift of snow. She went down hard on her knees, felt nothing which was worse than pain. She struggled back to her feet, but it took 3 tries, and when she finally stood, the world tilted dangerously. This is how it happens, she thought with the strange clarity that comes with extreme cold. This is how people die in the snow, not dramatically, not quickly, just one fall, one moment of weakness, and the cold does the rest. She thought of her mother wasting away from consumption in that narrow bed on Beacon Hill, thought of the promise she had made at that bedside. I will not give up, Mama. I will not surrender. I will find a way forward no matter what. I will not die here, she said aloud, though the words came out slurred, half frozen. I refuse. 40 minutes. She could no longer feel the bags in her hands, but kept walking because stopping meant death. The road had disappeared entirely, now buried under fresh drifts. She was navigating by instinct, by the slight rise and fall of the land, by pure, stubborn will. 50 minutes. She fell again. This time she couldn't get up. Her arms wouldn't support her weight. Her legs had stopped taking commands from her brain. She lay in the snow face down and felt the cold settle over her like a blanket. It wasn't so bad, really, almost peaceful. The wind didn't seem as loud anymore. The cold didn't hurt. That's the hypothermia the nurse part of her brain observed clinically. You're dying, Eliza. Your core temperature has dropped below 90 degrees. Soon you'll lose consciousness. Within 20 minutes after that, your heart will stop. She tried to push herself up one more time, failed. The snow beneath her cheek felt almost warm now, which she knew was the final cruel joke the cold played on its victims. I'm sorry, Mama. I tried. And then, impossibly, a voice cut through the wind. Miss Brennan, over here. Follow my voice. She must be hallucinating. That happened, too, in the final stages. The mind playing tricks, offering false hope. But the voice came again, closer now, and with it the sound of a horse's heavy breathing, the creak of leather, the crunch of boots in snow. I've got you. Stay with me now. Hands, strong and sure, turned her over. A face appeared above her, half hidden by a scarf, but the eyes visible. Blue eyes startling against tanned skin, filled with an intensity that cut through her fading consciousness. "Samuel Wade," she managed to whisper. "That's right. I've been watching for the coach for 3 hours, saw it never came through town, figured something went wrong." He was already lifting her, cradling her against his chest, as if she weighed nothing. "You're frozen half through, but we'll fix that. Hold on." He carried her to his horse, a massive bay gelding that stood patient in the storm, and lifted her into the saddle before swinging up behind her. His arms came around her, solid and warm, and he pulled a heavy coat of sheepskin and wool over both of them. "Cabin's a mile north. You stay awake, you hear me? Talk to me. Tell me your name." "Eliza," she managed. "Eliza Catherine Brennan. Eliza Catherine Brennan from Boston, Massachusetts, formerly of St. Mary's Hospital, daughter of Captain William Brennan, deceased, and Margaret Brennan, also deceased. 26 years old. No living relatives. 43 cents to your name and a medical bag worth more than most doctors' offices." His voice was steady, calm, as he urged the horse into motion. "I got your letters, Miss Brennan. All 3 of them. Read them so many times I can recite them." She wanted to ask how he knew all that, wanted to ask why he had been waiting, wanted to ask 100 questions, but the cold had stolen her voice. She could only lean back against his chest, feel the steady beat of his heart through the layers of cloth and leather, and let him guide them through the storm. "Almost there," he said, and she felt the horse change direction, turn into what must have been a break in the wind. "You're going to be fine, Miss Brennan. I didn't wait 3 years for you to freeze to death on my doorstep." 3 years. The words filtered through her fogged mind, strange and inexplicable. But before she could process them, the world faded to white, then to gray, then to nothing at all. She woke to warmth and pain, which meant she was alive. The warmth came from a fire close enough that she could feel its heat on her face. The pain came from her extremities, as frozen flesh began to thaw, a burning, tingling agony that made her gasp. "Easy now. That's the blood coming back. It's going to hurt for a while, but it's a good sign. Means you'll keep all your fingers and toes." She opened her eyes. She was lying on a narrow bed, covered in thick quilts, in a room built of rough-hewn logs, chinked with clay. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames dancing behind an iron grate. The room was sparse but clean. A table, 2 chairs, a shelf with books and a few dishes, a door that presumably led to other rooms, and Samuel Wade sitting in one of the chairs beside her bed, watching her with those startling blue eyes. He was older than she had imagined from his letters, though she realized now he had never actually stated his age. Somewhere in his 30s, she guessed. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that came from years of hard physical labor, dark hair going gray at the temples, a face that was handsome in a rough, weathered way, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into sun and wind, strong hands calloused and scarred, resting calmly on his knees. "How long was I unconscious?" Her voice came out as a croak. 2 hours. I had to get your temperature up slowly. Too fast and the shock can stop your heart." He stood, poured something from a pot on the stove into a tin cup, brought it to her. "Drink this. It's tea with honey and a bit of whiskey. You need the warmth and the sugar." She tried to sit up, found her arms shaking with the effort. He slid one hand behind her shoulders, helped her rise, held the cup to her lips with the other. The tea was strong and sweet, and it burned all the way down to her stomach, but the heat was glorious. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. We need to check for frostbite." He set the cup aside, pulled back the quilts. She saw that he had removed her wet clothing, dressed her in what looked like a man's flannel shirt that hung to her knees. Her face burned with embarrassment, but he seemed utterly matter-of-fact about it. "I'm a nurse," she said quickly. "I can examine myself. I'm sure you can, but your hands are still shaking too hard to do a proper job." He unwrapped the cloth he had wound around her feet, studied them with a clinical eye that matched her own. "Toes are red and swollen, but the skin's intact. No blackening. That's good." He pressed gently on each toe, watching her face. "Can you feel that?" "Yes, it hurts." "Good. Pain means the nerves are working." He moved to her hands, repeated the examination. "Same story here. You'll be sore for a few days, but you'll heal." She watched him work, noted the gentleness of his touch, the calm efficiency of his movements. He had done this before she realized. Treated frostbite. Probably treated worse. "You said you waited 3 years," she said. "What did you mean?" He finished wrapping her hands in clean cloth, sat back. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze held something she couldn't quite read. "I put that advertisement in the Boston papers 3 years ago," he said finally. "Right after my wife died. Got a dozen responses in the first month. Women looking for adventure, looking for a husband, looking for anything other than what I was actually offering." He paused. "I didn't answer any of them, because none of them understood what I needed." "And what did you need?" She kept her tone neutral, inviting. "A partner. Not a wife, not a housekeeper, not a decoration. Someone practical. Someone who understood that life out here is hard, that it takes work, that pretty words and romantic notions die real quick when the winter comes, and the wolves are howling, and the nearest neighbor is 15 miles away." He met her eyes. "Your first letter, you didn't talk about love or marriage or any of that. You talked about survival, about making do with what you have, about the practical realities of medical care in isolated conditions. That's when I knew you might actually understand." Eliza felt something shift in her chest, a recognition she hadn't expected. "So why did you wait 3 years to bring me out here? Because I had to know you were serious. I wrote back, asked you questions, hard questions. What would you do if the water froze and you had to melt snow for cooking? What would you do if the nearest doctor was 40 miles away and someone was dying? What would you do if you were alone for weeks at a time while I was working the herd?" He smiled faintly. "You answered every question, never complained, never asked for guarantees I couldn't give. And when your father died and you lost the house, when you had every reason to write and beg me to send money for the train, you didn't. You sold everything you owned and bought your own ticket." "I don't take charity," she said quietly. "I know. That's why you're here." He stood, moved to the stove, ladled something from a pot into a bowl. "You need to eat. You haven't had food in 12 hours, and your body needs fuel to recover." He brought her the bowl. It was stew, simple but hot, with chunks of meat and vegetables in a rich broth. She ate slowly, feeling strength return with each bite. He watched her in silence, and she found herself studying him in return. He was nothing like the men she had known in Boston. Those men had been politicians and merchants, men who lived by words and contracts and social position. Samuel Wade was different. He moved with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in his own body, in his own space. There was a quietness to him, a stillness that spoke of patience and careful thought. When she finished eating, he took the bowl, set it aside, then returned to his chair. "We should talk about the arrangement," he said. "Make sure we understand each other." "All right. I need someone to help run this place. I've got 150 horses, 30 breeding mares, 20 geldings for sale, the rest young stock. I do all right selling to the cavalry, to ranchers, to freight companies, but I'm one man and there's only so much I can do alone." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I need someone who can manage the house, yes, but more than that. I need someone who knows medicine, animal and human both. I need someone who can think on their feet, solve problems, work hard without being told every step. And in exchange, room and board. A share of the profits, 20% paid quarterly. If things work out, if we find we can stand each other after 6 months, then we talk about making it permanent. Legal marriage, partnership in the ranch, the whole thing." He met her eyes. "But if it doesn't work, if either one of us decides this was a mistake, then I pay your way back east and we part as friends. No hard feelings, no obligations." It was the most businesslike proposal of marriage she had ever heard, and yet there was something refreshing about his honesty. No false promises, no romantic illusions, just the plain truth laid out for examination. "I have a question," she said. "Ask." "Your wife. How did she die?" Pain flickered across his face, quick and sharp, before his expression smoothed back to neutral. "Childbirth. She was 7 months along. Something went wrong. Baby came early breech and there wasn't time to get the doctor. I tried to help, but I didn't know what I was doing." He looked down at his hands. "Lost them both in the same hour. Anna and our daughter. I'm sorry. It was 3 years ago. I've made my peace with it." But the tightness in his voice said otherwise. "That's part of why I need someone with medical knowledge. Out here, you can't always get to a doctor in time. You have to know how to handle emergencies yourself." Eliza understood, then really understood what he was asking for. Not just a wife, not just a partner, but someone who could prevent the nightmare from happening again. Someone who could stand between death and the people he cared about. I can do that. She met his gaze steadily. I've delivered babies. I've set broken bones, treated fever-stitched wounds. I'm not a doctor, but I learned from good ones. That's all I'm asking. He stood. You should rest now. Tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it, I'll show you around the place. Let you see what you're getting into. He moved toward the door, but she stopped him with a question. Samuel! He turned back. Why did you say you'd been waiting for me? Not for a mail-order bride. For me, specifically. He was quiet for a long moment, his hand on the doorframe, his back half turned to her. Because I read your letters, he said finally. All of them. And I knew that if anyone could survive out here, if anyone could build something real in this hard country, it would be someone like you. Someone who had already survived the hardest thing there is. What's that? Loss. He looked back at her, and his expression mirrored her own grief, her own hard-won endurance. She had not expected to find someone who understood, who had walked through the same valley of grief and come out the other side still breathing. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside the cabin it was warm, and for the first time in 3 years, Eliza Catherine Brennan felt something that might have been hope. She slept deeply that night, exhausted by the ordeal of the journey and the days near death. When she woke, pale winter sunlight was filtering through the small window, and the storm had passed. She rose carefully, testing her body. Everything ached, and her hands and feet throbbed with the lingering effects of the cold, but she could move, could function. Someone had brought her carpetbag and medical case into the room while she slept, set them neatly at the foot of the bed. She dressed in the warmest clothing she owned, a wool dress and heavy stockings, and ventured out to explore. He looked up when she entered, nodded. Morning. How are you feeling? Sore, but alive. That's about what I expected. He gestured to the table. Sit. Breakfast is almost ready. She sat, watched him move around the small kitchen with the ease of long practice. When he served the food, she ate gratefully, realizing she was ravenously hungry. I need to check on the horses this morning, he said. You're welcome to come along if you feel up to it, or you can stay here and rest. I'll come. I want to see the operation. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, bundle up. It's cold out there. 20 minutes later, wrapped in a coat, he lent her wool, too large but warm. She followed him across the yard to the barn. The cold was sharp but bearable after yesterday's hell, and the sun on the snow was almost painfully bright. Samuel pushed open the barn door, and Eliza stepped into a different world.